Russia and the U.S. have sparred over Ukraine tensions at the UN Security Council. Many other countries are pushing for de-escalation. Now, William Denslow has more from New York.
After more than 100 meetings were held in private, the United States says that it was time for a public meeting to discuss the tension on the border between Russia and Ukraine. Linda Thomas-Greenfield, the US ambassador to the United Nations, called on Russia to de-escalate and choose the diplomatic path. Russia's UN representative said that he categorically denied allegations from the likes of the US and European allies that it was planning an invasion into Ukraine, saying that those were unfounded allegations.
We fully understand the desire of our American colleagues to whip up hysterics regarding its own situation, regarding the so-called Russian act of aggression. It is something they want to do, including within the Security Council. Security Council's colleagues are being put in an extremely difficult position. This is of great harm, this hysteria, to Ukraine itself.
You've heard from our Russian colleagues that we're calling for this meeting to make you all feel uncomfortable. Imagine how uncomfortable you would be if you had 100,000 troops sitting on your border in the way that these troops are sitting on the border with Ukraine. For us, this is about peace and security.
And China very much refuted the premise of holding a meeting at the UN Security Council. Zhang Jun, the Chinese ambassador to the United Nations, stating that China was in favor of private meetings rather than what was described as megaphone diplomacy. Also stated that he didn't believe that a public forum meeting at the United Nations would be conducive to diffusing tensions. China also very much rejecting the premise of this meeting put forward by the United States, saying that there was a threat to Ukraine's peace and security. China citing that Russia has denied that it has any intentions of invading Ukraine. The message from China, they call on all parties to adhere to more dialogue going forward and for them to implement the Minsk agreement. William Denslow, CGTN, New York.
Well, the tensions between Russia and Ukraine have led to divergent views from the West on how to tackle the situation. While the UK and the US have been sending military support and adding troops in Ukraine, Germany has refused to send weapons there. It's even urging other European countries not to do so. Now, Guy Henderson has more from Kiev.
Well, within the Western camp, there are divergent and diverging views on exactly what the approach should be to de-escalate this crisis. On the one hand, you have countries like the United Kingdom, whose Prime Minister Boris Johnson will be heading to Ukraine later this week, who argue in favour of taking a harder approach that they say is more likely to persuade someone like Russian President Vladimir Putin to back down, essentially. That is a view perhaps more aligned with that of the United States. And that is why you have seen both the US and the UK send anti-tank missile systems, for example, to Ukraine. That is why you've seen the UK government introduce a plan to widen the scope of potential sanctions against Russia should things escalate further. I think what we'll hear from that side of the argument this week is tough language from Prime Minister Boris Johnson and warm thanks from senior officials in Kiev, particularly when it comes to that kind of military aid and military support. On the other hand, you then have a delegation of the European Parliament, which is currently in the eastern city, port city of Mariupol, and that is representative of what is still the prevailing continental European approach to diplomacy at the moment, mainly led by France and Germany, which says essentially we should continue to tread carefully here. We shouldn't risk severing ties and severing chances of dialogue. And that, I'm sure, will continue to be a discussion point through the week as well, because aspects of that have irked some senior officials in Kiev, particularly Germany singled out for example, not only refusing to send lethal aid, but actually blocking some of its European partners from doing so as well. Interesting to watch the sort of balance that politicians have to play in Kiev, because on the one hand, they're very thankful for for example, the lethal military aid that's coming from countries like the United States and the United Kingdom, but at the same time, they're actually quite critical of the language that diplomats and politicians from those same countries are using in places like the UN Security Council at the moment, when they talk of publicly of the threat of imminent invasion and the build-up of Russian troops on the border. And you've heard from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and his allies in recent days words like "keep calm." They are keen for officials in those countries specifically to sort of tone down their language. And I think one of the main reasons for that, or certainly a contributing factor, is the impact that kind of language they believe is having on the Ukrainian economy. Big falls in the stock market, rising inflation's ticked above 10% or around the 10% mark in the last month or so. And their worry, of course, is that if Vladimir Putin's aim is to destabilise Ukraine, well, at the moment, their view is that that's already happening, that is at least taking a step towards Vladimir Putin achieving some of his goals without a gun even being fired.
Now, the U.S. State Department says Russia has delivered a written response to Washington's proposals regarding the Ukraine tensions, and the U.S. did not reveal the details of the letter. A Russian and U.S. top diplomats are set to speak by phone on Tuesday. And on Monday, Russian President Putin and French President Macron addressed the Ukraine tensions and the regional security issues on the phone. They agreed on further talks and sought chances to meet in person. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he will speak Putin as soon as he can, after a scheduled call was reportedly cancelled on Monday due to Johnson's Partygate scandal.